All right, so what we want to do is make a truss tape and go over its elements. So this is my typical truss test. It is 16 feet long and is got all sorts of garbage on it. But it tells me what I need to know when I make a test. And the one thing that will be ignored when you're making a truss tape are the following things: hanging position, light position objects, data tags, truss item plugin objects, straight truss, AutoPlot truss tags, and AutoPlot breakout labels. Here's an AutoPlot breakout label. Here's a truss tag. This is truss. Don't worry about it. Okay, so let's make the truss tape. Okay, here's the first place you can go to customize your truss tape. And these are what get put on the two tags, one at each end. Over here is where the truss tape will start. Over here is where the truss tape will end. It will always default to the position name of the first lighting device it finds that's selected. You can change this, and that's what it will use. However, when you make your next truss tape, it will plug in the next position name that it finds in the first lighting device that it finds. This is a set of 3 different places where you can type text. I'll show those to you when we get there. And you can also place an arrow at each end of the tape, and it will point up screen or down screen. If it's a totally vertical tape, it will point either left or right, which will be equivalent to upscreen and downscreen, or upstage, downstage. If you want, you can flip the arrow. It defaults to upstage. So here it will point upscreen, here it will point downscreen. And you can give the arrow a label or not. The dashes here are defaults, but they won't always show up. They are defaults that first happen because all of this information gets remembered from truss tape to truss tape, except for position name. Okay. This here is scale, and that has to do with adjusting your viewport. We'll talk about that later after the webinar if you want. Okay. I will show you where these labels are. Typically, this says stage right, and this says stage left, or stage right, or upstage over here, or typically downstage. I put the dashes in here so that you will see where label 1, 2, and 3 will be. And so we're going to say okay. And we draw the line. There are some rules about drawing the line, but I'm not going to get into those at the moment. Okay. The AutoPlot truss tapes are record-based, but they will accept information from any record of any object that is selected. If an object has more than one record, it's always going to look at the first record, and you will have to go to your objects to determine what that is, or you can just do it by trial and error, but it won't pull around and ask you. What this particular dialog is showing us is that there is a record that it has found that it knows nothing about. So it's going to use a symbol called unknown object to put information in. Okay, this particular dialog says it has found an object that doesn't have a record, but it will put it on the truss tape. In fact, everything that is selected, except for those exceptions that I mentioned in the beginning, will be put on the truss tape. So it's going to say, okay, this doesn't have a record, but I'm going to stick something where it is on the truss tape. And here we go. What we see here is the viewport that's created. and it is encompassed in the page boundaries that you see here. These page boundaries were determined by the line that you drew. All it did was say, how long is that line? And made it a little longer than the line so that it could encompass the tags at the end. You don't have any control over that. However, you could right now come in here and go into the file menu and go to page setup and just change the height here. And if you did that, you would see these expand upwards or downwards or in width. However, you do not want it greater than 2.89 or less than 2.83. We have found that the Epson printer, that seems to be the only one that works, will fail if you make it wider than that particular boundary on 3-inch tape. But we will cancel this out because everything is fine. Let's zoom in on the tags. Okay, this is the start label. This dash represented label 1. This is label 2. This is label 3. This is what you could have put in there. All of this gets put in there automatically, including the date and the file that it's a truss tape of. Here is the arrow and its label. And this is where you start the measure. This is where the crew has to know where to place the truss tape. And this is what it uses to place the truss tape. You don't get to change this. This is either the end of the truss that they can identify, or it is a place on the truss that you can identify. There's nothing on this truss tape that says this is the end of the truss, although that probably is the default. This is what's at the end. No particularly pertinent information other than whatever you've typed in and the position and the arrow and its label. Okay, now where did this viewport come in? And that's what's going to be critical here. When I drew the line, it started making a design layer. This design layer here. And when it was finished making that design layer, it put in all the objects that need to be displayed into that design layer and then made a viewport. It then created a sheet layer and put the viewport in it. At this point, you can print. You're done. But let's go into the elements that we need to adjust if we want to change things around. So let's go to the design layer. This is a particularly interesting problem here that we'll get to later. Okay, this is a symbol. This is the symbol that is used to display intelligent lights. And if you want to make a symbol that is displayed on AutoPlot truss tapes, you have to make a symbol that is done 1-to-1 scale. Okay, it's a 2D symbol, and it can be anything, any graphic you want, any graphic you want to import, as long as it will fit in the boundaries. Let's unpause this. Those are the boundaries of the viewport, so they better be within the boundaries of the viewport. Okay. But if it fits in there, it will get printed, and it can be any symbol you want. Okay, let's take a look at this symbol. It is attached to this record. Can everybody see this? Let me Command Option 8. the AP tape label record. Every symbol that you use must have this record attached to it. Okay? And that record is made up of these fields. Do I need to expand this for anybody? Chime in if you do, and be sure you have unmuted. Okay? It's field 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10. There are two other fields that get filled out or not filled out automatically. Let me explain that. The distance is always filled out. You don't have to display the distance, but it will be in this record. The use symbol is legacy and also might be used in the future. It's not filled out. You could, if you wanted, put anything you want in that field and make sure that your symbol displays that field, which we will go into in a moment. But critically, this symbol has to be attached to this record in order to display the information you want displayed. Okay. We go into the symbol definition of this particular guy. And this particular guy is label-intelligent C. So what we're going to do is go here, and we're going to go here. If we look at this, the symbol is made up of the graphic, which is just primarily some rectangles and an arrow. And it's made up of text fields. And there are two kinds of text fields here. These are just plain text fields that I am using to label the information next to them. Okay. This is a, whoops. Let's zoom in a little bit. Is a text field that is linked to a record field. And if we come up here, modify, and we go to link text to record, you'll see that it is linked to that record I pointed out earlier, and it is linked to field 3. The reason that it is displaying field 3 right now is because this particular symbol in its definition, whoops, has field 3 in the field 3 edit box. If I type something else in here, come back here, come back here. Whoop. You see that it displays something else. So, does everybody understand? Does anybody not understand linking text to record? It is the one way that you will get your information into the graphics that you want. Okay. Now, this particular symbol and all the ones that are here came from a file that was downloaded when you downloaded and installed AutoPlot tools. And that particular is contained in your user folder. Why isn't I'm so sorry. Is contained in your user folder. In the plugins folder, into APS plugins, AP Spotlight data, tape label folder. This particular pathway is in the documentation that is in the support files that you download. But this particular file is where those symbols came from. Let's open it. Boom. Okay. Now, Every symbol has 3 versions. Let's look at those. There is this version, which is labeled label-light default space DS. That means it's going to be on the down screen or downstage portion of the truss tape. This one is labeled exactly the same, except it ends in space US, which means upstage or upscreen, and it will be put on the upper portion of the truss tape. This one is labeled exactly the same, except that it ends with space C, which means it will be put in the center of the truss tape and fill the entire field. Now, the space C, the space US, and the space DS are important, okay? That tells the command what symbol to use and where to put it. But they are essentially all the same. All of the fields that are connected to text are connected to the same text. You could, if you wanted, have different things displayed differently based on whether or not it was on the upstage chord or the downstage chord, or whether it was all center, but that makes very little sense to me. And what gets put in here means that these are identical except for the way they face. And you will see that the upstage has unflipped text so that it faces the person on the upstage part of the chord, or the stage left part of the chord, or stage right part of the chord, I should say. We'll go over that later. All right, so if you want to do anything that is different than this, it could be wise that you just pick one of these symbols and duplicate it in your resource browser. Just duplicate one of these guys, mess with its graphic, give it a new name, and save it. And then it can be used. Typically, the one that I start with are these. These are the others, or these, the ones that are unknown objects, because the only thing they have are a rectangle, an arrow, and linked fields. They don't have any labels saying what those fields represent. They just say field 1, 2, and they will display those. They are linked text. If you wanted to link them to a field, you could put a label next to them. Just get yourself a text. And let's make that a reasonable size. Oops, can't do that that way. Let's do it this way. And you could make any label you want, place it anywhere on the symbol you want, make the symbol as wide as you want, doesn't matter. Okay. Is everybody clear about the creation of these symbols? Is there any particular question that you might have run into when you have played with AutoPlot about making these symbols? Okay. Now, what happens when you download a new version of AutoPlot? All the changes you have made to this file get erased and are replaced with the file that comes in with the new download, which is extraordinarily irritating. A couple of things you can do about that. What you want to do is you want to drag it into this folder here. Because what happens is that when you run the command and it looks for symbols, it will look in this folder here before it looks into the AutoPlot data, AutoPlot Spotlight data folder. So that if you have something here, it won't look at this file. It will look at the file you have put here. So you can save your changes here. If for some reason that isn't available to you, you can always grab these guys and drag them to your desktop, download AutoPlot, and put it back. But it's much better if you don't do that and stick them in here. Okay. Now let's go back to the design layer. You can see that this is a downstage conventional. This is a center intelligent. This is an upstage other. So now what you really want to do is tell these symbols what fields you want in what fields. And what do I mean by that? Essentially, what you want to do, and here we have a legacy hoist. Let's start with a lighting device that we're all familiar with and have to have. The instrument type goes into field 1. Okay. Fixture mode goes into field 2. Oh, sorry, goes into field 8. Position goes into field 2. You want to achieve this assignment for the command to make. So you have to have some way of telling the AutoPlot truss tape tool, some way to tell it to put these fields into these fields. And that will change from object to object. A legacy hoist puts different things in different fields. How do you do that? You run this command. Everybody see that? Edit truss tape assign worksheet. This is where you're going to assign fields. We'll come back to this dialog. When you run that command, this particular worksheet gets created. And what we have here in column A is a list of all of the records that the command knows about. If you have a record, an object that has a record that is not listed here, you can just type it in. Okay. It will then know about that record, and it will use all of the things in these rows to make the assignment. So let's look at those. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a legacy hoist. What we go in here, we say, whenever it sees a legacy hoist, it sees this record here. So what it's going to do is go to this use symbol column and use the symbol called label-hoist. You will notice that there is not a US, a DS, or a C following the name. That's because where the object is determines whether or not you use an upstage, a downstage, or a center symbol. If a symbol is above the center line, above the line that you drew, or to the left of the line that you drew, if it's perfectly vertical, it will use the upstage version of this symbol name. If it is below that line, it will use the downstage version. If it is on that line, it will use the center version. Now, by on the line, I mean within 3 inches. You can be 3 inches above or below the line you draw, and it will use the center version of the symbol. But this column holds the name of the symbol that will be used whenever it finds this record. It will use one of 3 labels done with that name. You'll notice that all of the symbols that ship with AutoPlot start with label space dash space. Okay. That's fine. You can name them anything you want. You do not have to label them, start them with label space dash space. I just happen to do that. It keeps me clean and organized. Okay. The next thing is you can force a command to always use the center version. If it's true in this column, it will always use the center version no matter where it finds the object relative to the line you drew. And the next columns are the workhorse here. This really is, should say 10, but we'll get to that. Okay, so it's going to put in field 1 of the fields 1 through 10. In field 1, it's going to put the hoist type. In field 2, it's going to put hoist label. Field 3, the hoist number. Field 4, control ID. Field 5, the distro port. These are not written in stone. The only thing that you have to type in here is the name of the record field. For those records that are held in the object info palette shape pane, you can just use the name of that particular record, that particular field, I should say. One problem that we do have is that this record name over here has to be the true name. That is to say, we come here and we click on this legacy hoist. You will see that it says legacy hoist. If you click on a lighting device, you will see that it says lighting device. If we come over to this worksheet, we see lighting device, but we don't see legacy hoist anywhere. That's because the true name of the legacy hoist is hoist VW. How do you find that out? Well, you could go to the plugin manager, or you can run an AutoPlot command, which isn't in the AutoPlot workspace. And we're going to go over that right now. If I click on this, which happens to be a distributor object, what I'm going to do now is run this command, list records and fields, which will list the records and fields of the selected object. You can find that in your work under AutoPlot tools in your workspace editor. What it does is it makes a worksheet, which gives you way more information than you particularly need, but this is the true name. And you can see that it is slightly different than the one displayed here. This has a space between words. This one doesn't. And that's what has to be in the record name. Everybody follow that? Any question about that? Any confusion that you don't know what your question is, but you have one? Okay, so you're going to put the true record name here. The true name of the field doesn't matter. That is to say, when you look at these field names in the plugin manager, you will see both the real name and the alternate name, or what we call, I'm not sure the username. Doesn't matter. You can type in any of these names as you see them. The command itself will determine what it needs to see and retrieve data from. Okay, so that's how you tell each object what to display and where to display it. There is one other thing that you would want to know, and it is the change that came with 2022. If we look at lighting, well, before we get into that, I forgot, we also need to say, you might want to show different things based on the value of a particular field. And in this particular worksheet, lighting device, the device type light will use a different symbol than the device type moving light, which uses intelligent and conventional. So those are two different symbols. Okay. They have been assigned, as it turns out, exactly the same data. They happen to be, the shipping ones with AutoPlot happen to be very similar, almost no difference between them. But some people want to show a great deal of different stuff. I have a problem. The reason that mine are particularly, or the shipping ones are particularly similar is because I have found the LED fixtures to need as much information as the moving light fixtures. And so I have ended up showing the same in both, but you can show anything you want. The object that I'm trying to display here is that the value of this record field, device type, when it changes, can have different values all along the way. Okay. Cookie and Tom, I think both of you, like to change this record field to instrument type. And then they should
Indeed, we do.
We do.
Yeah, and then they show a different label for each kind of instrument type. So you can imagine that this list is pretty damn long for them. They have a bunch of lighting devices here, each with instrument type in here. And then a different symbol for every kind of instrument type in their drawing. Okay. You will notice that the hoist doesn't have anything in the record field. So every hoist will use this symbol. You do not have to have a value in this column. Okay, if you don't, that's what gets used. So what about lighting devices? Because what we have here, and this is the change in 2022. Well, here's the rule. You cannot have more than one kind of record field. You can't have device type here and instrument type here. That will break the command. But you will notice there is one guy that doesn't have anything. What this means in 2022.20 is that if it does not find an instrument type value that is listed here, it will use the values in this row. Essentially, this represents the default. Not only if you don't have a record field, but even if you do have a record field and it fails to find either of these values, it will use this row. So if we go back to where we were before, the value of power, the value of special effects, the value of other, which are all available in the dropdown of device type, are not listed here. And if they are selected, those particular objects will use that particular symbol and put in those particular values. Any questions about that? Now, having filled out this guy, the only way you can save the changes or entries that you have made is to run this command. Save truss tape assign worksheet. You can't just save the file. The saved file will save that worksheet, but that worksheet will be overwritten because it saves the data here. So if you want to save your changes, you must use this command. And that's what this says here. I don't want to hear any blood-curdling screams coming over the internet when you fail to do that. Okay, so, okay, what this dialog says is that it is saving the changes to this pathway. This is the pathway on my machine, which it will be the same as yours starting here. 2022, plugins, user cable folder, tape label folder, user tape label fields will be the name of the thing that it saves. And you can ban this from ever showing up again if you want. Oops. And there it is. Save today. And this is just a text field. It's just a text field, a list. If we open it, In Excel, which we can do, there it is. Now, you can in fact edit this in Excel or any other text editor of your choice if you want, except that you must have these 2 rows, okay? And you must put in dashes for empty fields. You don't have to do that in this one here. These don't have to be dashes, they can be blank. That's because the command knows to keep all empty fields filled with dashes. And just as more information than you need to know, that's because VectorScript requires dashes to keep these particular tab delineated fields separate. If it doesn't see anything in a field, it ends up messing this up. The reason that I bring that all up is because if you're not going to edit it in VectorScript, in Vectorworks using my command, and you want to edit it here, and there may be reasons to, you have to put a dash in empty fields. Okay. Any questions about that? Let me look at my outline. Yes.
Sorry, Sam, one quick question, which is fairly self-explanatory. So the bit, you must run save tape and all that. Is that automatically inserted below the whatever is the last row with data, and you don't need to leave any blank rows, etc. for that?
Correct. You do not. What this particular announcement will show up below the last row, whatever that is, whether
Lovely.
It's row 10 or row 300. This will show up below row 300.
Great. And also, are fields case sensitive?
Yes, they are case sensitive.
Cool. Thank you.
I find that unfortunate, but it was a lot easier coding, and there are certain kinds of entry errors that are different than the entry errors if I make it case sensitive or not. They end up with different errors, and it's just better to say type it in the way you see it and not to try to explain what case sensitivity means. Any other questions about that? Okay, now a couple of things. That's essentially most of what you need to know, if not all of what you need to know. But let's go over. Here we are on the design layer. You realize the viewport, and if we continued this guy to the end, it would encompass all of these objects. That means that anything that you draw that's within those rectangles will show up on your tape. Absolutely anything. If it's within here, within this area, these guys are going to show up. However, only that portion of them that is within this particular dimension, vertical dimension. Okay, but that allows you to make certain kinds of notes that you want to have. Now, let's go back to horizontal truss. This particular construction here. What a pain. How the hell are you going to put that on a truss tape? Well, we had them selected, so they're on the truss tape, but not in a way that is very useful to you. Let's take a look. We're going to talk about center lines. Okay, that particular construction is here. Because these two particular object lighting devices were on the same left-right dimension, or were actually in the same place on the truss, they were placed on top of each other. So you have to figure out what you're going to do about that. You can, if you want, do something like this. Oops. Okay. And hope that that tells your crew what you need to do. This is a symbol that I made for pipe. And we go there. That's because this particular object had the pipe piece record attached to it. And it had these typed in there by hand. Okay. Resulting in this particular symbol. But you see the problem here. And I don't have a good solution to this. I think you'll all find your own solutions to that particular problem of how to do that. If anybody wants to volunteer their solution now, I'm sure everybody would be grateful. But
well, generally when I have odd rigging issue, anything that's over-rigged or out-rigged or has something comedy attached to it, then I have a dedicated field, one of the user fields in the object info palette that I just put notes in, and I have a notes field on that, which appear on the truss tapes.
Yeah, I guess our biggest issue, our biggest problem is when, and let's go here and talk a little bit about what the command does. When you draw the line, and this is not the line I'm going, but when you draw a line here to run the command, and it looks at each of the objects, what it does is it draws a line perpendicular from the insertion point of the object to the line you drew, and that they must be perpendicular to each other. And that is the dimension that is measured. In other words, it measures from the start to where the perpendicular line lands from the insertion point of the object. Now, what if the insertion point doesn't exist? For example, that's a polygon. It doesn't have an insertion point. Any object that does not have an insertion point, which means it's not a symbol and it's not a plugin object, anything else will have a line drawn from its geographic center. Okay. So what we have here are two objects that are going to be on top of each other because they have the same distance from here to here. Nothing will fix that except going into the design layer and moving them. Remember, they work on top of each other. So that's what you got to do, and try and figure out whatever it is you want. I could imagine, in fact, that you just eliminate these particular symbols and draw something here explaining what's going on. You could just get rid of these guys. Oops, don't hit return, hit delete. And you could type text. Come on. Give me a break. Fun. Break. Explaining what's going on. Unfortunately, this you have to do by hand. I have no way of automating what you would think is the appropriate note for those kinds of situations. You do have the ability to make the note, which is kind of good.
Yeah, I think, Sam, I like you, would love to hear other people's take on this, but I mean, this is exactly the same as you would get if you're working with lightning tapes. If you have a busy truss, it does require a little bit of tidying up work on the design layer to get everything to fit. It's just the reality of the beast, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are we clear on that? Let's take a look at this guy here. All sorts of interesting things are going on here. We have two symbols that are on top of each other because they were in the same place. This is center line, and here is the projector. Let's first talk about video screens. This is a video screen object. One thing that we have here with the video screen object is an object whose insertion point is right here. This works out because the projector is at the exact same angle as the truss. Okay. You look at the truss angle, it's zero. It's zero. If we look at the video screen, its rotation is 0. All good. If the video screen, if this whole object was at a slant and we drew our line from here to here, no problem, like 45. This is not a problem here. Whoops, undo and Z. Because this perpendicular works out. What doesn't work out is when this, somebody messed with that. Let's go over here. There it is. If we rotate this guy like this, when you run my command, the AutoPlot command, it's going to tell you that the projector on that truss is here because it measured from the insertion point here. Okay. There is no fix for this. There is a workaround. The workaround is on your design layer, have another symbol for a projector, plop it right down on top of this guy. Okay. And then eliminate whatever is displayed by the video screen and leave the one for the projector. Everybody understand that workaround? And everybody understand the problem? Anybody not? Do not be, hey, don't pretend. In any of this, do not pretend. Okay, glad to hear it. Okay. So let's talk about the line you're drawing. That pretty much is all of customization. And the big change in 2022.2 was the ability to have a default field in the record. Other than that, it worked the way they always worked. But now let's talk a little bit about the line that you could draw when you run the command. First of all, if I run this command again, it will replace this design layer and it will replace this sheet layer and it will replace the viewport that is created in the last command. You do not have to do that. It will not overwrite that. It will literally, before drawing anything, delete anything with the same name. Okay, so let's run the command. I have a keystroke for that. We'll accept that. Okay, when you run the line, the length of the tape will be the length of the line you draw, unless the line is a shorter distance than the length of the selected objects. If it is the length of the selected objects, it will make a tape long enough to accommodate those objects plus the two tags on each end. So you don't have to go all the way to the end. Most people do, I usually do, but I can imagine times when your screen and your truss tape don't act well together in terms of trying to get the entire 150-foot truss into drawing a line. You don't have to do that. What you do have to do is start where the measurement is going to be from. That is inviolate. Where you start the line is where the truss tape will say it wants you to start measuring from. So the other thing is that if you draw in a direction that's wrong, it is a good way to abort what you're doing. Essentially, it's a cancel button. Just go in right to left instead of left to right. because my command requires that you always go from left to right. Now, center lines. Well, it's nice to know where center lines are, and this particular center line was given a symbol because it was connected to the document center record, which had no values, but it did have the record. So it knew based on this tells you where it's coming from, by the way. Document center record. Use the label center line symbol. All the rest of the fields don't matter. But this is the way you tell it what symbol to use. I have often been asked, can we start measuring from the center line? Okay, especially when you're dealing with long 100-foot truss and you've got 30 feet of light on it. And somewhere on that truss, what you need is a center line of your collection of lights and a place to put that. And no, we don't. What you do have on your tape is a mark where the center line should be. Let's see. And because that's there, if you know where the center line on your truss is, you can ignore, oops, this label. You can just tell your crew to place this mark where the center line is, which is essentially the same thing. Well, you may be wondering, well, what about all the measurements? They're from the end, not from the center line. That doesn't matter, because what matters is that their relationship, the distance from here to here, the distance from here to the center line, has already been determined. That's how they were laid out. In other words, this was laid out from the same start measurement as this was laid out from. Therefore, if any one of these symbols is on a known location, all the other symbols will be in the correct location. Any questions about that statement? So you don't have to measure from center line, you just have to mark it. And then tell your crew to place the center line where the center line is. The measurements have already happened. Now, in metrics, if it's a metric drawing, these particular numbers will be meters. And these will be separated by meters. It will be feet and an imperial. You can get rid of these guys. You can either do it, make them invisible by class, you can select them and delete them, all of that. What I didn't know, and we have yet to figure out, that Michael Creason ran onto a particular bug. This particular line here, the one that determines whether you're below it or above it, that cannot be made invisible or eliminated. If it is, your truss tape will not be the right length, and the relationship between the symbols will not be in the right length. This line must exist, and it must be visible. It can be very thin, it can be very gray, but you better see it. If you don't see it, the command won't see it, and your truss tape will go to hell. Okay? All right.
Could it not be colored white?
I don't think so. If you want to make an experiment, you can.
Sure.
And the problem for that is that I would think that you could. But because it's the same as the tape color, how this gets translated to the Epson printer is bizarre. We have only tested this on the Epson printer. There was another printer that somebody, excuse me?
I was going to say it's more a function of the printer than the plug-in or the
yes.
tape you're printing.
Yes, it is. And I have only experienced one other printer that a user called up having a problem with, and we tracked down all of the problems to that particular printer driver, which won't work with this particular setup, and he couldn't use it. That printer will not work with this command. I think it has to do primarily with old printer drivers. There are going to be a lot of receipt printers that have printer drivers that are not up to date. And Epson seems to be doing a better job of that. Although I'm constantly terrified that the operating system on the Mac and Windows 11 is going to outstrip the printer driver capabilities of printers to keep up, especially with the way we're particularly stressing out receipt printers these days. But anyway, this guy's important. Play with white if you find it particularly irritating. All the rest can be made invisible by class or what have you. They are classed. And you can find the class up here. These are ruler lines. And this is ruler text, I think. Yeah, ruler text class. Any other questions? Because that's how you do it. That's how you make what you want to see happen on the tapes. Okay.
For those of us who take lousy notes, is there a way we can watch this again?
There will be. It will be unedited with all the hemming and hawing.
For sure.
But yes, it is being recorded. I will put it somewhere. I will let everybody know where it is, including those that have not attended. Any other questions? Do you have any
Sam,
places that are on? Yes.
Do you know what printers you're supporting these days? The Epsons, obviously. Are there any others?
No, there are no others.
I was wondering. I haven't been able to find anything else myself. So yeah.
There are lightning tapes, and I did this. We kind of did this independently, but then I saw their announcement. I tried to do it with some people that I knew that had receipt printers, and I couldn't get those to work except for the Epson. Lightning tapes apparently got some others to work, but they did not scale accurately enough. Only the Epson was the one that would scale accurately enough. You should know that. Let me get back here. Now I'm going to do this. Command R. Let's go over that.
Sam, was it only that one particular model of Epson printer that does scale, or have you found there any others?
I haven't tested the others, and I haven't found the price differential to be worthwhile. The only one that was tempting was more expensive than the 2S, the 2i, I should say, the T2i. So I haven't found them. I haven't put in any effort to find them because it means buying the printers. Having found one, I just say use this because I know it works. Now, if somebody has a printer and I'm willing to sit with you on Zoom and go over printer drivers and printer driver settings and play with it and see what we can get going. But to a certain extent, we've gotten the Epson to work and this particular Epson to work. And I don't care after that because it's always going to be $200+ to get one that's consistent enough to be usable in our work.
Sam, what printer are you using then?
Right now, I'm using Michael Creason's, and he took it away from me.
I mean, what
yeah.
model?
It's the. Let's go here for a moment. Before we go there, this particular number here scales the viewport. Those little measurements of feet, those will vary from different printer papers to different printer papers within the Epson 2i print. In other words, you have the same printer, but you will get different spacings depending on what printer paper you're using. So you will need to scale your viewport using this dialog here to the right scale. And so you should do some test printing. And let's go over that, and then we'll go over the particulars of the Epson. Okay. You can scale this guy by hand somewhere. Here it is. You should print out the first 5 pages, which are 1 foot long of the tape. And they start at the end, not at the beginning, unfortunately. But measure the space between foot marks as a test and adjust this custom scale appropriately to make these guys the appropriate distance apart. Okay. Once you've discovered what this is for your paper, you can just type it into that dialog, and that dialog will remember it, and you won't have to worry about it from then on. But if you change papers or printers, then you're going to want to do another test and measure this distance here. In terms of what am I using, that will be, let's go here instead. TMT20II. Do you see that, John?
Yeah, no, it's just that somebody gave me another Epson printer, which I passed on to Tom, and we've had a round with it, but we haven't had any joy as yet. On the scaling issue, Cookie came up with, folk working in metric, quite a bulletproof way of setting the scale, is that you print the first number of meters at a scale of 1, measure that, and the figure in millimeters is what you put in as your custom scale, and that comes out bang on.
Oh my gosh. Okay. How cool is that?
Well, it's not very cool if you're doing it in feet, admittedly.
I'm not too worried about it. Once if you only print out, 5 feet, you can pretty much nail it within, 3 or 4 tries and then go. But that's an interesting relationship to the universe size to the scaling of the viewport. I like that. Okay. Any other questions? Can't be that easy, but maybe it is. And I will get right on getting rid of those debug alerts and posting a new version, which will be 0.21. Much to my irritation.
I do have a question before we go.
Oh, yes. And it can also be after we deal with that, if anybody has any AutoPlot questions, I'll entertain those. Yes, shoot.
And I put it in the chat too, but does your AP tape symbols, if I open a drawing from somebody else, is it going to be in my object folders for that file, or do I need to import something
Good
into
question.
that drawing?
Yes and no. What will be in the file, if we look at this guy here and we look at his resource browser, this will exist in the file you get from that person. And it will use these symbols if your list matches his list. That is to say, this particular list right here is what will be used by your command, and it will be your list. So it will use these symbols. Now, because it's your list, these will probably be your symbols, and it will use them instead of his, unless in this folder, which is in the file that he sent you, has something that is named the same as your symbol, in which case it will use the symbol that is already there. I have a tendency to say, cut these out and use your own symbols. Why, it shouldn't matter. You should not be required to use his symbols. You do not have to worry about not having symbols for, not having his symbols and then having something not printed on the tape. Something will always be printed on the tape, and it will use your symbols to do so. Now, if they have a record in this column that you don't have in your worksheet, then you're going to get a default symbol used. It's going to use, that's the Martin guy. Where did he go? That's funny. It's going to use this guy here. If it can't find the record name here in your list, if he has an object that has either no record or a different record than is listed here, you will end up using this file here and not what he had intended to use. Understood?
Go back and check the record worksheet.
Yeah, you want to be, yeah, if it's essentially what do you want on the worksheet? Is there some object, there that you don't have listed? And you could in fact make this listing and go get his symbol if you wanted, if that was important, or make your own. But what's important is that it be listed here. If it's not listed here, then it's going to be put on the tape, but it's going to be put on the tape using either this symbol here or this symbol here.
When we import a drawing and open it, the plugin is going to automatically populate with those folders, though, correct? It's going to, like, we don't have to open a truss tapes folder and import all these symbols. They're going to import with the plugin.
Correct. Yes, they will import with a plugin, and the command will grab all of the symbols from the default folder that comes with this, with the commands. If you want to save your changes, you just have to be sure to save them to the file mentioned earlier, which I can go over again because a number of you came in late. But let me get other questions going, and then we'll find out. We can go over that again. Anybody else got a question about that? Or anything else? Any other AutoPlot questions? Well, thank you very much, gang. Let's go over what happens when we do this. Okay. When you download all of the commands, this particular file, the AP Truss tape labels, will be loaded into your plugins folder, and they will be available to you. Okay. Not only that, this particular list will also be automatically downloaded and installed in your plugins folder, and you will be presented with this, which you can change and make your own however you want. But you do not have to import by hand anything in particular. Just install the commands and those labels and the associated symbol, the associated field assignments will be imported with it and used. This is an addendum to the customization of truss tapes video about something I thought was not made clear enough. When you select the Make Truss Tape command, the command will import symbols from the file you saved in the tape label folder located in your user folder in the following pathway. User folder, plugins, user cable folder, tape label folder, and the file. If you have not yet saved a file of custom truss tape symbols, the command will import symbols from the folder that came with the AutoPlot Tools download, located in the following pathway. User folder, plugins, APS plugins, AP Spotlight data, tape label folder, and the file that holds the labels. Once the command has imported symbols into the file that you're working on, those symbols are placed in the Resource Manager in a folder called Truss Tape Labels. From then on, the Make Truss Tape command will use the symbols in that file, and it will only import symbols that have a different name from all the symbols already in the file. This means that if you make changes to your custom truss tape symbols after you have made truss tapes in another file, those changes will not be imported into the file where you are currently trying to make truss tapes, and you will not see the symbols that you have just changed. What you need to do is delete the Truss Tape Labels folder that you see in the Resource Manager located in the file that you're working on in which you want to make truss tapes. After you make that deletion, the Make Truss Tape command will import symbols from the file of custom symbols that you have saved to your user folder. Every time that you make changes to symbols in your custom truss tapes symbols file, you will need to delete the Truss Tape Labels folder in the file that you are subsequently want to make truss tape labels. I hope that clarifies any problems you might have in getting your changes made into your currently working file.